Hello and welcome. My name is Nicole Mollenkopf, and I have shared a short summary of my professional background at the end of these slides. The title of my presentation is Creating a Culture of Continuous Improvement. This is the relevant financial relationship disclosure for this presentation. And these are the learning objectives that will be addressed during this presentation. Finally, these are the key abbreviations that will be used in this presentation. Let's begin with a self-assessment question. The concept respect for people refers to all of the following except giving employees latitude to do whatever they want as long as the job gets done, challenging staff to perform better, removing obstacles so staff can do their work well, or ideas and solutions that are generated by those closest to the work. When we return to the question, I will provide the answer and discuss the rationale. So learning lean and quality improvement in general as a never-ending journey is an important concept. Remember, in lean we said that a foundational principle is Kaizen, or continuous improvement. And I think this begs many questions like, what happens after the lean project is finished or the QI project is finished? Will people revert back to the old processes and behaviors? Will all of the gains be lost? How can you push for additional continuous improvements? And how do you create an environment where people want to continue to improve? These questions must be considered in order to really improve our work systems and improve outcomes for patients. We've got to get away from this flavor of the month mentality. Not only is this ineffective, but it degrades the buy-in from frontline staff. There must be a culture where we continuously are learning and seeking to improve, not just from failures or less than perfect outcomes, but also from everyday successes. What goes wrong? What goes right? We've got to remain sensitive to the possibility of failures, but also focus on frequent events and how things go right. From a leadership perspective, there's got to be a visible and transparent culture of improvement that everyone can see. Think about the currency of leadership, and if you stop and think about that for a moment, you know that it's attention. So if everyone sees that it's important to the leaders that we're constantly improving our processes, they're going to pay attention to it. This is the culture of continuous improvement that I'm talking about, and it's got to be visibly important. Culture of continuous improvement has to have what we call an improvement engine. And this is really just a systematic approach to improvement, so some sort of methodology. It doesn't have to be lean, but lean's a really great tool, a really great methodology, kind of comprehensive, provides tools, provides the culture, the mindset, the philosophy, so that can be really a really useful model. But there are other models as well. It's got to have a standardized, highly effective tool set. Again, lean has that, but other methodologies have potentially have that as well. There's got to be a common language across professions, across groups, across departments, across the organization. It's really helpful. It doesn't mean that, the pharmacy department, for example, can't use lean if everyone else isn't using it. It certainly does not mean that. But it is really helpful if across the organization there's that common language and we're all kind of approaching problems in a similar way. People have to be trained. They've got to have the skills. Again, there's got to be that leadership that, reinforces this. And the leadership's got to invest in safety or resource the work. So again, that improvement engine's got to be resourced. There's got to be investment in safety. There's got to be, investment in helping to see that this is everyone's job. The people on the front line need to be trained, they need to be integrated into this culture of continuous improvement. And if they're not, this can lead to failures. This can lead to that, really that flavor of the month mentality. So I think this quote really resonates. Why do so many lean implementations fail? According to Mann, it's because lean is too easy. And I don't disagree with that. It really is easy. It's easy to implement. And he's really talking about the tools. And I think that's really true. It's actually quite easy to use some of these tools like 5S. It's easy in some ways to make them more visual, which is great. The problem is tools are only one part of lean. Understanding the lean principles and trying out these tools, that's the starting point. The real challenge is to find the leadership necessary to implement these strategies so that we're not just implementing strategies, but also transforming the way we care for patients. This requires a constant, continuous effort, requires constant attention. Like I said, it's far too easy to implement those physical trappings of lean. And so, operational method sheets, 5S, some of those other tools that I've reviewed in the other modules, they're easy, but we've got to really go, beyond that. So what's missing? How do we identify what's missing? I think one great place for me, at least, when I was faced with this, is we had made lots of, great changes, but there was a point where we started to see slippage back into our old way of doing things. And, for me, what I did was I went back to the origins of lean. I went back to the Toyota production system and really thought about the Toyota Triangle. This is the Toyota Triangle. This is a model. It's very complementary to the House of Toyota that I shared in the Lean Tools lecture. It really describes the fundamental elements, one of which is the tools. So those technical tools are really important. Visual management, 5S, error proofing, etc. And again, those tools are quite easy to implement, but the triangle is made up of more than just those tools. It's made up of the management system. So how do we manage? What's the approach to management of the work so that our staff does this stuff on a daily basis? And then what's the philosophy? What are our core values? How do we translate those core values into action? If you haven't gotten the hint with lean, we've kind of focused on the tools almost exclusively, but there's a lot more to the picture. I've got to mention again people development. When I was talking about the tools and the philosophy and people being at the heart of lean, we've got to keep our eye on that kind of constant at all times. I'm going to talk a lot more about people development in a moment, but looking at this graph, I think it speaks volumes. If you just use the tools from a success standpoint, maybe at best you get kind of 20% in terms of the opportunity for improvement. The likelihood of disappointment and the staying power of those changes isn't really that high. And you'll hear things like, yeah, I see, I heard, I told you, this is just another one of those QI methods. This is another flavor of the month. We all knew it wasn't going to stick. We all knew it was going to fail. See, lean doesn't work. Why are we continuing to do this? Those are the kind of things you hear. And for me, that really shook me and really caused me to go back and think about, how do I get beyond the tools? We want a pursuit of excellence, and ours had stalled. And so, really getting back and figuring out how do we get to that additional 80% was really important. I think a lot of those organizations that find themselves in that scenario, like I said, it's at some point I found myself in that scenario. I think that, again, they're kind of falling in that trap of just using the tools, but not really the accompanying change management principles. Change management is a systematic approach to implementing change that prepares organizations to accept, implement and sustain improved processes that result from our, kind of improvement methods like lean. We can look at the Kubler-Ross change management curve. This is kind of the emotional response to change. It allows you to effectively understand how people are transitioning through change. Kind of where does a specific employee, manager, or group kind of fall? Like what's the impact on them over time? And, kind of looking at this, it's like shock, denial, frustration, depression, experiment, decision, but ultimately integration. So, maybe you get kind of up to that integration, but then you kind of fall into this despair part where things aren't really going as well as we thought they were. And that's when things kind of, get shed and we go back to our old processes, which is, really what we're trying to avoid. Again, another quote that I really love: leaders don't make plans, they don't solve problems, they don't even organize people. What they really do is prepare organizations for change and help them cope as they struggle through. This is a pretty famous quote by John Kotter. So, we've thought about the kind of technical aspects of work. We've talked a lot about, how to change the technical aspects of work. I don't know how much I've really talked about the adaptive components as well. Even the technical components can be really challenging for people. That's why it's so important to engage people up front in the design of new technical work patterns. It's going to require training, but if we've got input from the people that are going to be doing the work, then when you have to actually go back and retrain it is a lot easier. Again, as I've said, there's a surprising lack of inclusion of frontline staff in the development of improvement work. And so if the only thing you take away from this lecture is that you've got to incorporate frontline staff in, I think that's a win. At a minimum, they're going to have to help you develop the technical work, the new processes, the new patterns of work. And for that to be successful, it's got to be predicated on staff acceptance of that new technical work. But that brings us to the other side of things, which is the adaptive side, or the people side, or the human side of things. And as I've already alluded to, this is a bit harder to work through. In order for people, or I suppose for adaptive work to positively influence change, people need to believe the change is needed, and this will require people to change, their beliefs, their habits, their loyalties, maybe even their priorities. And essentially, this is the work of changing hearts and minds of the people at the front lines. And this, of course, is the hardest part. So really changing the way they think, the way they feel, and ultimately their actions or what they do. So, what's at the heart of these successful implementations? It's the people. People are at the center of all of it. Start with the heart. And the lean philosophy for respect for people really is, at the heart of this. And, coupling that with this idea of elimination of waste, we utilize people to really root out waste and, really become lean. We've got to look at all of these components. We got to look at the tools. We got to look at the management system. We got to look at the philosophy, and we got to put people really at the heart of all of that work. There's so much power in this concept on so many levels. And, I think if you don't get this, you're going to get stuck like I was. I knew it was important, but I wasn't doing anything about it. And for me, when I got kind of stuck in my performance improvement journey, again, I went back and really wanted to transform the way the work was done and continuously improve safety. But I had to refocus my efforts back on people and really being respectful of people at the center of this work. And again, this isn't just the employees, but obviously patients. But in large part, when we're talking about change, we've got to really engage, the people kind of at those sharp ends, and, really look for kind of opportunities for building that village of people who are going to really think about, sit at the table, and really, design that work. Now, one thing I want to point out, when we think of like respect for people, it might be different from what kind of colloquially we kind of think. It doesn't mean that managers give employees the latitude to do whatever they want out of a sense of trust and just kind of hope that, allowing our employees to do the right thing will, result in good outcomes. Respect for people is a little different in the lean context. It's not about always being nice. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's not about, just letting people do whatever they want or be happy. I mean, obviously we want to be nice. We want to, handle conflict appropriately. We want happy employees. But we can't have those things at the expense of the process itself. So it's definitely not, on the other end of the spectrum, it's not about letting people struggle to get their work done, right? Like, it's really about focusing in and, getting the job done right, but not at any cost. We can't just look at outcomes. We have to look at how does the work get done? How are we, how are our staff dealing with problems? How are they dealing with, changes in workload? And, in lean, it's all about focusing in on the system and demanding that employees do their best work and be their best, but not through overworking them. In lean, the idea is we want to identify and remove obstacles. We want to make it easy for people to do their best work. We want to challenge people and push them to do better and to create value for themselves and for the patients that we're serving. And for staff to be able to do that, we have to help them develop their abilities. So, having people really at the center and helping them, really recognize there's no limit to how far human wisdom can be developed. And so really we're encouraging systems thinkers. We're encouraging them to, avoid blaming each other for problems and really thinking about how is the work designed? Are we making it easy to do the right thing, or are we making it easy to make mistakes? Of course, that's not what we want to do. So how do we develop their abilities? Well, first and foremost, we've got to start with training. We've got to train people on what lean's all about, what these QI approaches are about. Again, it may not be lean, but just, quality improvement in general. And we've really got to make sense of like what that approach is. And bottom line, you've got to train people on whatever your approach is, whether it's lean or some other approach. You've got to explain the approach, what it is, why it works, how the tools can be used, and really how does using that approach achieve goals, and then show them. You can do simulations, for example. One of the things we used to do with our staff in orientation was what we called the marker exercise. The marker exercise was essentially telling them they're going to make IVs in the IV room and, using the markers kind of as like, a stand-in for making an IV. We would tell them, pull all the caps off the marker and put the caps back on. We had them do it two different ways. We'd have them do it in a batch method where, they had all the markers in their hand, they pulled off all the caps, they put them all back on, and we would watch them. We would measure data like time it took and variation, but we'd also look at mistakes like, did they put the caps back on wrong? Did they, get marker on their hand when they were doing this process? And, ask the group, how did it feel to do that? Was it stressful? Did you like it? Were there problems that, you found frustrating? And then we would ask them to redesign the process based on the lean concepts that we had taught them. Invariably, somebody would say, oh, let's do single piece flow. Let's do one marker at a time. So each person would get a marker, take the cap on and off, and then pass it down the line. And throughout that process, we were essentially simulating what a batch of IVs and kind of all the problems that could come along with that versus like what would it look like with a single IV that you worked on at once, and how might that be more efficient or at least as efficient? How might it be less error prone? And so using those kind of simulations can really help your folks understand the principles. Other things, we might send them to training. We had a formal lean training program, or we have a formal lean training program where I'm at. So I know not every place has that, but there are a lot of organizations that can provide that. The other thing we would do is just-in-time training. So even for those folks that hadn't gone to belt training, like green belt training or black belt training, if they were part of a project, at the start of that project, we would do a refresher training. We'd talk about the key principles. We would, make sure everyone that was a part of that project really understands the concepts that they were about to put into practice to improve workflow, etc. Other things, we would do waste walks with staff. So, at the start of projects, we would go and look at the work. And we would use the waste walk form to help kind of facilitate that process. It's really teaching them to see things a little differently. Finding waste, how do we address waste? Again, this is just another way to respect people and put trust in them that they're able to use these tools. They're able to identify these problems in everyday work. And they're able to figure out ways to eliminate waste. I think this is one of the most really powerful things that you can do as a medication safety expert, and really just trusting that on a daily basis they get it and they're willing and they're engaged, to improve the work that they do. And it's not just your job to fix everything, it's everyone's job. I'll tell you, I was absolutely guilty of this at times. I loved saving the day. I loved, being the medication safety officer that could spot the waste and eliminate the waste. And, I'll be honest, I wasn't alone. There were managers that I worked with that also loved this. They loved being the firefighter. They really defined their value by their own problem solving skills. And so as leaders, we need to not gatekeep on that. We need to open those gates up and let everyone into that problem solving, and really, delegate that responsibility, as close to the front line as we possibly can. Really, creating systems where leaders, managers, frontline come together, they're thinking, they're problem solving, they're engaging in systems design, and really adding value. How do you do this? I think it's really important, number one, for goals to be established. Generally, kind of, leadership kind of take the first pass at that, and then, really kind of an iterative process with the frontline staff. They're together developing those goals, sharing feedback, kind of going back and forth in that process of creating value and maintaining communication between the leadership and staff. A variety of ways you could surface these, ideas from staff. One way could be through an idea generation system. Another way could be through safety rounds or CUSP teams, which are comprehensive unit-based safety program teams. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but first let me share an idea generation system. So this is a real example. This was a system that I had a hand in developing in the pediatric pharmacy where I worked, where I was a safety officer. We had this, board posted right outside of the pharmacy. When we moved to a larger space, we were actually able to move it in the pharmacy because we had enough room. And basically, we created a method for staff to submit ideas. They could track what was happening with those ideas. And, one thing when you start talking about getting staff involved, if you aren't responding to them and they don't hear about what's going on, eventually they're going to stop talking about how to improve the process. So this method was great because it was very visual, it was very transparent, and people could see kind of where in the process their ideas were. This is kind of an up close of how you would go about submitting ideas and kind of what would happen to those ideas. Depending on the idea, it might go to different parts of the process. It might be like in progress, or, waiting to be implemented, etc. And then this is kind of an up close of the idea submission form that we used. This is another example. This was from another pharmacy in the hospital where I worked. Again, you can see, there's a little idea card. It's really easy to like look at the board and visually see like where is it in the process. Is it a quick fix? Is it something that's going to turn into a project? Is it something that's waiting to be implemented? Um, you know, there could be maybe a barrier to implementing, and so that could sit in the kind of barrier, and that's great because again it's transparent. People can start thinking about, well, how do we go forward and how do we solve this problem. These communication boards can be really effective. So overall, encouraging engagement and communication is really important. This can be done through idea generation systems like I just shared, or comprehensive unit-based safety programs. This was something that worked really well where I used to work. We had these programs in each of our pharmacies. We called them safety rounds, but it was a very similar, kind of idea where we would have a facilitator, so somebody in that pharmacy that was kind of responsible for safety. Could be the safety officer, could be, frontline staff. In my pharmacy, we had 3 or 4 different people. I was ultimately responsible, but we had a couple frontline pharmacists, a couple techs as well. Essentially, these are just ways for staff to get involved in safety projects and programs and to voice their concerns. We would have rounds every month, or at least once a month, maybe more frequently. And frontline staff would show up and talk about their problems and offer solutions for how to fix those problems. We had standing agendas that included safety issues. We had education sessions, newsletters. I've mentioned waste walks several times. None of this was easy, but in the end of the day, it was all about building a village, creating a learning environment where really everybody was part of the solution. Everyone came together to learn, engage, and actually improve the work that they were doing and ultimately improve safety. It takes time, it takes commitment at all levels, but it is helpful. And even communication methods like team steps. Now, I'm not going to get into team steps, but making sure that people know how to communicate, not just at kind of the clinical level, but they know also how to communicate their quality and safety concerns. That's really important, and team steps can help with that. I already kind of talked a bit about our pharmacy safety rounds. It was really modeled after patient safety leadership walk rounds and those comprehensive unit-based safety programs. So it's kind of a hybrid of the two. Our pharmacy leadership would visit one division each week. In some of our divisions, we also had tech safety rounds. So in a given month, like in pediatric pharmacy, for example, we would have regular safety rounds, and then we had an additional session just for technicians because they had a lot of issues and they weren't always able to voice all of their concerns kind of at our standard meeting. These worked out really well. I mean, there's definitely some downsides. Sometimes they weren't coming to the regular safety rounds and really integrating kind of across disciplines, which could be problematic. So we had to watch that. But I think all in all, it was definitely beneficial to have those tech specific rounds. Kind of the things we would ask: how's the next patient going to be harmed? What errors or unsafe conditions have been keeping you up at night? Tell us about an error that you intercepted this week or this month that could have really harmed a patient. And, what are we going to do to fix these issues? Really, this is great because it gives a voice to the frontline staff. It empowers them to fix problems. And there is published evidence of impact of these kinds of safety rounds in pharmacies, and certainly on nursing units as well. I won't talk again about waste walks, but I just want to mention we did these for all lean projects up front. Go to the Gemba, look at the work, kind of document, kind of quick and dirty documentation of the waste, and maybe, brainstorming around ideas or how to get rid of that waste. These are really, really can be very useful. You can integrate them into safety rounds or huddles, or other methods. So really, it's just all about engaging the frontline staff into this improvement work. So again, the tools are easy. The people, focusing on people, that's just the right thing to do. But the kind of next question is, how do we manage? How do we build a management system? This is difficult, I will tell you, but it's absolutely crucial to successful long-term lean implementations. And I say lean, I'm, subbing lean in for really any quality improvement method that you want to use. But if you want that to be successful long term, you've got to have some kind of management system in place. So again, another quote, management has no more critical role than motivating and engaging large numbers of people to work together towards a common goal. Defining and explaining what that goal is, sharing a path to achieving it, motivating people to take that journey with you, and assisting them to removing obstacles. These are management's reasons for being. This is one of my favorite quotes. This is from Gary Convis. He was one of the managers and the president at a Toyota manufacturing plant in Kentucky. And, again, he kind of highlights how important it is for management to, use that currency of influence and put their attention in continuous improvement. And if you've got your attention there and you've got resources there, your frontline staff is going to follow. So, how do we lead our employees? How can we make this more than just a one-time project? Recognizing that lean is never a never-ending journey. We've got to guard against that kind of slipping back into the old methods, and we're going to have people on the same page, talking the same language. Again, for me, it was kind of reassessing at that 5-year mark for me. I started to see kind of reversion back to the old ways, and I had to really stop and think about how am I going to build a management system around this. And I certainly couldn't do it on my own. I was the medication safety officer. I had to engage the operations managers, the directors, the technician supervisors, had to have that mutual buy-in from all these different leaders, and we had to build a process that was going to engage our frontline staff. We had to decide, was this something we were going to commit to? And ultimately we did. To that end, lean is really more than outcomes. It's not just about the tools, it's about focusing on the everyday processes, holding people accountable to those everyday processes, and looking at the process, not just the outcomes. Because in many cases, we're going to still have good outcomes even if the processes are beginning to fail. We've got to look at the process on an everyday basis. And that's where the management comes in. That's where, standard work at the management level comes in, and we go beyond rewarding people for good outcomes, and we really reward people for good behavior, and really reward people for maintaining those good processes that will consistently contribute to good outcomes. I mean, this is just a mentality that we've got to ingrain in the process. So again, that right process, lean is all about the process and the results, not just the results. And so, you get what you expect and you deserve what you tolerate, right? So I think this quote is really important. We can't tolerate cutting corners and not following the process. Sometimes we've got to deviate from the process, but we've got to recognize that that's happened and talk about why that's happened, and what we need to do to make sure that we can continue to utilize the best possible processes. So it's not just about those results, but really about the underlying process. So leader standard work is really all about creating a process of audits and standardized work, rounding, going to the Gemba, holding huddles, really talking about, what is it about, what is that process that's going to reinforce the standard work at the front line? How do we use, those lean tools effectively? And if we're not, again, we deserve what we tolerate. So this really comes down to the manager doing what they need to do to make sure that the processes are being carried out, the way they've been designed, that we're measuring results, that we're taking action when we need to take action, that there's some kind of daily accountability built into that process. Maybe it's at shift change, maybe it's on a daily basis, maybe it's on a weekly basis, maybe the processes are good enough that we can just do it on a monthly basis. But the bottom line is having the discipline to follow through on that management system in the same manner that we're asking staff to follow through with the standard work at their level. What it comes down to is, we're not really like hounding employees and checking on them, but it's about engaging them and talking to them and having visual ways to know that the process is working for everyone. And when it's not working, it's obvious, and we need to, figure out what the issues are and really, manage through those. So we're driving quality control. We're putting continuous quality improvement processes in place. And really, to support this, we have a high performance management system that, is really kind of driving that cyclical process. And managers have to be disciplined every day, possibly multiple times per shift. It really depends on the process, and really the process is going to drive what's needed. But again, we can't expect frontline people to do this if, as leaders, we're not doing it. Finally, it's the philosophy. So without constant attention to the let me start over. Without constant attention, the principles will fade. The principles have to be ingrained. It's got to be the way that we think. Again, another quote from Taiichi Ohno. So what is the philosophy? What do we think? All of this is based on the philosophy. What do we believe as an organization? What is our purpose? How are we providing value? Recognizing people are our most valuable resource, and respecting people. Engaging in continuous improvement, and engaging everyone every day in that continuous improvement. Going to where the work is done, solving problems at the management level, making sure the tools are working for everyone. And, if you have that kind of, process of those three components, your success of being, or your chance of being successful long term is going to be much higher. All right, so let's go back to that self-assessment question. The concept respect for people refers to all of the following except. And when you look at these options, I think it's pretty obvious that giving employees latitude to do whatever they want as long as they get the job done, this is not really respect for people, right? Hopefully you recognize that giving employees to do, the latitude to do what they want as long as they get the job done really isn't respect for people. Instead, challenging them to perform better, removing obstacles so they can do their work well. These would be the elements of respect for people. Allowing them to generate ideas and solutions. This is really what we define as respect for people. So in conclusion, QI methodologies like Lean are comprised of more than just technical tools. It's a big pitfall to just fall into the mindset of using the tools. Lean is really an organizational culture. It develops from an integrated system of tools, managerial practices that are underlied by the philosophy. So it's not just focusing on one part, but really kind of looking holistically at the process of eliminating waste. And that elimination of waste is important, but it's just as important to have respect for people. Really engaging leaders at all levels and our frontline staff at every level, and making everyone responsible for continuous improvement. And that standardized work doesn't just apply to the people at the front lines, but in order for this to really work, managers need to have standardized work as well. These are the references that were used to develop this presentation. And finally, thank you for your time and participation.